All right, everyone, we'll go ahead and get started with today's webinar entitled Ace the Interview. I'm Cindy Strobridge and I'll be the moderator for today. This webinar is part of our Together We Roar Grad Series 2020. You guys can kind of see that on our first screen here. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to quickly go through a few housekeeping items. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. This webinar is expected to last approximately 45 minutes and questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. If you do have a question, you can submit that through the Zoom group chat box. Also, you'll see this presentation is being recorded. You'll be able to view this recording later on our YouTube channel, and we'll send you a link to the recording to anyone who is in this webinar currently. Now let me introduce our speaker and my Mercer colleague, Kim Meredith.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm so thankful to be here with my Mercer CCPD colleague, Cindy. She and I do webinars regularly. I'm really excited to see some names in our participant window that I recognize. I appreciate you guys taking time out to be with us today. This is a special week as we are celebrating our class of 2020. I just couldn't be more excited. This is such a timely topic. You know, this is interview season, so it's certainly time to talk about acing the job interview. Some things in our society have certainly changed, but many things have not. I hope that you'll have some takeaways today. So I think I'll go ahead and get started. For today's webinar, I've identified 4 learning goals that I set forth, some takeaways that I hope you'll be able to experience, you know, gaining some insight into the candidate selection funnel and the types of interviews, and also just the fundamental purpose. What is the purpose of a job interview? We're going to talk about that. And learning how to properly prepare for a job interview. As you'll hear me say a few times today, proper preparation is key. Learning about the interview curriculum inside of the Big Interview tool. I'm excited to share about a tool that Mercer has invested in for you. You may have heard of it. If not, then I will certainly have lots of slides on that as well. And so the slide that's featured here, it shows the candidate selection funnel. All right, and so this was just my idea to give you an idea of what's happening on the other side of the desk. I think if we can just take a look at these types of fundamentals, it'll help us gain understanding, getting that perspective of the other side of the desk, if you will. So take a look here. We have a very big, not so big candidate pool of 79 candidates. And we know that immediately 57 were screened out. 22 candidates remained in the candidate pool, and they were closely evaluated. We know that their resumes went into a stack and had human eyes likely on them, and were really actually read instead of scanned. 9 candidates identified as well qualified. These definitely caught the eye of the employer. And so we set out to say, okay, let's call these 9 people in, and let's start with a round of phone interviews. Now I put in parentheses this word screen out because most of the time the phone interview portion of the interview is really just a screen out time, because we know that having 9 candidates come in is a little bit too much. And so most of the time we want 5 or under candidates to come in person. And so we know that the phone interview is typically thought of as a screen out process. And then we'll have final interviews, usually face-to-face, or in today's climate, certainly virtual is happening a lot now. But we know this is generally going to come down to 1 offer, unless of course there's more than 1 opening. All right, so the types of interviews, just to give you some basics here, just to remember that we have our historical in-person interviews, which have always been in existence, whether that's a solo interview with 1 candidate and 1 or more interviewer, but also group interviews have been very popular in the last decade. And certainly now we know there's quite a few distance type interviews taking place, and these can be in a teleconferencing platform using a webcam. They may also be a one-way video interview where candidates are asked to record their responses to questions as a part of the screening process, and also lots of phone interviews. Let's talk about the purpose of the job interview. First, can you do the job? Again, we're thinking about things through the employer standpoint. Can you do the job in terms of your skills and experience? Second, will you do the job? In other words, do you possess the motivation, work ethic, and energy to achieve the work objectives? And third, will you fit in? Will you fit in our organization? This is when the employer is going to assess how you'll fit in with their dynamics, their culture, and their work environment. So right here, I'll go ahead and say that the most qualified candidate does not always get the job. There's certainly more to it than that. And I want to put that out there first and foremost, because we know that if we can control our expectations a little bit when, for example, if we don't get the offer, that we can understand there's so many dynamics that go into the decision of selecting a candidate. So now we'll go ahead and proceed with how do I properly prepare? So I have this quote from the famous UCLA basketball coach, John Wooden. It says, "Poise and confidence are not possible unless you have prepared correctly. Failing to prepare is preparing to fail. Poise and confidence are a natural result of proper preparation." This quote really inspired me for today's presentation, because we think about preparation in terms of how do I properly prepare? How do I make sure that I've covered the bases that I need to cover? And I really want to pay particular attention to the word confidence here, because we know when it's time to interview for a job or even grad school or really anything, we've got to show up there with confidence. In other words, we've got to smash that stinking thinking, and we need to take some time in our self-thoughts and really construct positive thoughts so that we can believe in ourselves. You'd be amazed at the power of confidence in terms of how that helps you show up for an interview. So in terms of preparation, I'll just hit this pretty hard with just a few things that I think that we can do that are pretty easy at first to get started. Invest in a Padfolio. A Padfolio is a great place to store a few copies of your resume, which you will definitely need to bring to an in-person interview, as well as a place to put business cards and a pen, and also to have that pad of paper. And yes, it is okay to use that during an interview. In fact, I highly encourage note-taking, including, if possible, if you want to jot down someone's name, especially in the case of a panel interview, that can come in handy if you don't happen to get everybody's business card at the end. And so the next thing, you know, we're talking about confidence, and I want to have you show up at this interview looking professional. You've got your Padfolio. We're going to talk about professional attire in a few minutes, but the handshake is something that I definitely wanted to address. You know, college career services professionals have always guided job seekers on delivering a confident, warm, and correct handshake to begin and end a job interview or any other professional conversation. We've occasionally had concern that this nonverbal gesture, if it's not done correctly, it might communicate the wrong message. So us career services folks wanting to instruct and to have our students get it right, so to speak, has made this instruction routine in all of our presentations in the past. So today we're not sure if COVID-19 will end our handshake. We definitely aren't extending our hand for a quick shake these days. And most job interviews are being held via phone or teleconferencing right now. So for today, the handshake is a bit of a moot point, but let us just say that we'll be smiling and possibly giving a gentle wave via a webcam for now. So we'll move on to professional attire. I've got pictured on the screen some examples of attire for men and women, and you can see clearly that it's going to be an interview suit. We call this business professional. Even here on our team, we call it business professional when we're dressing for career events and so forth, we'll say, okay, everybody wear business professional. This is quite a common phrase, and I want you to get used to that. But it also may be called interview attire. And certainly there are some industries and places where they might change it up a little bit, and especially in the tech industry and so forth. You'll need to do your research, and certainly that's another part of interview preparation that we're going to talk about today. So you're going to want to spend some time researching the employer before any job interview. And every single time there's an interview, even if there's multiple interviews for one position, I want you to take time to research. That could mean their website. I hope it certainly means their website, in fact, and their social media streams. I have found that Twitter can be a very useful source of information. And, you know, Google the name of the employer, see about their recent news releases, things like that. You're going to want to take notes as if you're going to write a paper soon about this employer. Key, absolutely key in proper job interview preparation is going to be that job description. So let me say, I hope you kept it. I hope that you have the job announcement. And in our job search preparation and strategy instruction, we certainly say you need that job description. You're going to need to deconstruct it. We know because the resume has to be so customized to that announcement. So hopefully you still have it. Let this be your warning. So if you're getting ready to go into job search season, so that you'll keep those. But if you would, you're going to study that job description again. You're going to look closely at the first mentions, the repeating words and phrases. You're going to need to take a deep dive into understanding this employer's needs, because that is going to help you get ready for an interview and get ready to shine. Now, I recommend writing things down and good old-fashioned note-taking, highlighting, things like that, whatever works for you and whatever medium works for you. Because ultimately, you're going to want to ask yourself, you know, what do I have to offer? What are they looking for? What are their top 3 needs? And what are my top selling points? So these are called your unique selling points. Now, certainly we have many selling points that we have to offer employers. And this is a part of that positive thinking and confidence building that I mentioned at the front of the slides here. But now I want you to take the time in looking at what you've done with this job description and aligning your selling points to their top 3 needs, okay? Making sure that you understand that your selling points are shifting with the needs of the employer and the needs of the particular job announcement, okay? So this is not your generic list. This is going to be very specialized to the job opening. Now, after you have done this work, and I think there's quite that, I don't want you to skip that, and I don't want you to skip on that time. Do the best you can with what notice you have about your interview. But next in this process of proper preparation is going to be for you to construct your questions about the job. Every candidate needs to show up at the job interview knowing what they want to know about the job or the employer. And so if you have taken the time to research this employer, you have taken the time to really study the job announcement and come up with your selling points, you are now ready to think of questions. And we all know that the employer can tell how much work you have done by how your questions come across. It shows when you have done your work. So I really want you to do your work. And candidates that say, you know, I don't have a question, you know, unfortunately, that's just not going to show your preparedness. It's going to come across as a lack of interest in the position. So even if you don't have a question, maybe they have really and truly addressed most things, I would encourage you to think on the spot of 1 or 2 questions at least, so that you show eager engagement at that point. So now let's move to answering interview questions. truthfully, so much advice is out there about how to answer interview questions. Just try Googling job interview questions, and you will have no shortage of results. There'll be lists and books galore. They're everywhere. There'll be hundreds and thousands of popular interview questions that have been published over, I guess, the last 10, 15, 20 years. We know that they're legitimate questions. We've seen them and we've heard them from candidates that they are in practice. And I admit this will be helpful for a job seeker to take a quick look at these questions in your Google, especially behavioral interview questions. You know, do take that time. I just don't want you to get deeply entrenched in trying to memorize answers to hundreds and thousands of questions. So let's use some caution there. And here's my main message. You can't possibly prepare for every single question. You just can't. There are likely going to be questions that you have never thought about before, or ones that did not appear in your Google results. So I want you to be prepared no matter what happens. So let's talk about a strategy that you can use that I think will really equip you for no matter what happens in the interview. Take some time to think about and remember your story. And when I say remember, you know, some stories we have moved to our long-term memory, and I want you to pull them out and put them in your short-term memory, and I want you to think back through them. And these stories are times when you were shining, and they can be about achievement and triumph, and moments when you were confident, moments when you felt that you were fully living, and they can be about unpaid experiences, so long as we don't go deep diving into your hobbies and things like that, which I would discourage you from doing. But really, even to Mercerians, when I'm talking to them, I often tell them, let's think about your Mercer experience. What hurdles have you come across? You know, that's not necessarily an example of a job or employment situation, but you have overcome so much and developed so many competencies. But again, think widely about your stories, think them through, and I want you to get them ready to share. So generally, I encourage job seekers to think of 3 to 4 stories. These have to be good ones. These are the ones that demonstrate your skills and strengths and fit for the role. Remember, we talked about that earlier. And I believe that you can use these stories to answer most any question that you are asked. Even all the behavioral interview questions, like tell me about a time when type questions. I do want to have you take a moment to have one of your stories to include a moment when you might not have succeeded at a particular goal, or some would say when you failed at something. Those are important to recall. Again, that's a popular behavioral interview question, so don't be afraid to have that in there. There's lots of tips about that, and certainly our team will be prepared to help you discern what could be a good story in the failure category. If you need that instruction, we're happy to do that. It's different for everybody. But a popular acronym that is used, and you can Google this, and we'll also talk about it in just a few minutes in the slides today, is STAR. That's our pro tip for our Mercerians, is to use the STAR method. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. So we couldn't do job interview preparation justice if we didn't talk about the toughest question. Do you know what that is? Our handshake e-blast today was headlined with this: the world's toughest question. What is it? Here it is. So tell me about yourself. So this question, or some variation of it, like you might get, walk me through your background. There's a couple of different ways they can ask this, but basically it's the tell me about yourself question. It comes up in just about every job interview, and many job seekers hate it. But I'm here to say that if you prepare properly, there's no reason to dread this question. Don't waste the opportunity by simply diving into a long recitation of your resume. This also isn't the time to mention your hobbies. Instead, try a concise, enthusiastic response that summarizes your big picture fit for the job. And I strongly recommend that for this question, and maybe even some others, that's up to you, but for this one specifically, I have found that candidates have good success when they write their answer down. I think writing it down helps you get it in the forefront of your mind, and you can memorize it, and then you're going to have to practice it so that it absolutely flows naturally, not scripted. But I think that writing process will truly help you answer this question. Advice for today in terms of, I can't talk about interviewing without talking about the in-person interviewing. And I know we're living in a virtual world right now, but I do want to have these bullet points included in today's presentation so that when that comes, and I'm certain it will, that you'll be familiar with these things. And I always tell candidates, you want to arrive at your indoor check-in point 10 minutes in advance. So that means you really arrived on site probably 30 minutes or more in advance of your interview. I think this is a very important point for you to manage your time so that the person you're checking in with, to say that you have arrived, you are checking in at least at the 10 minutes in advance point. Some would say 15, and that's fine. Much more than 15 begins to be a burden on someone's time, is what I hear. So I think that's a good window. And remember that interviews begin as soon as you get on site. I've heard stories of cameras and parking decks and things like that. And remember that you could be watched, and you want your professionalism to show. And you want to make sure to greet everyone warmly, understanding that you never know who you might bump into on the way into that interview. But you're not chewing gum. Make sure your cell phone is silenced or off. Truly do all of this before you get out of the car would be my advice, to make sure that you are fully ready. Let's talk just a little bit about body language because this is so important. As we talked about the handshake earlier, I had done a good bit of research on what the handshake means and how it can communicate confidence or not. Again, that was just one nonverbal, but there are so many others. Even if you're participating in a virtual interview, I want you to adhere to good body language and just, sitting up straight and making sure posture is good. I think all of these things will lend well in helping you to come across and exude confidence and exude the selling points that you're in fact trying to make as a point that you're a qualified and fitting candidate for the job. In terms of like the structure of an interview, let's just take a minute to analyze what these elements of an interview are so that you'll be prepared. In the beginning, there's always that breaking the ice and introductions. This would also be the time in a face-to-face interview where you might shake hands. In a virtual interview, it'll be much different, but still breaking the ice is normal. You're always going to have a certain amount of small talk and that kind of thing as people warm up to each other. And pretty much immediately after that, the recruiters will begin to ask questions. And you'll see that those questions will be layered in depth as they progress deeper into the topics, trying to get at the answers that they're looking for to be able to discern your candidacy there. And then as we move toward the latter half of the interview, you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions yourself. And in your preparation that you have those already ready. They're written down or printed and they're in your Padfolio, and that'll be your time to ask questions. Again, please take advantage of that. And then usually before the close, the employer will go over the next steps, give you a little information about how they're going to proceed and maybe even a little bit about a timeline. And remember, there is no time in the interview when it is a good thing to ask about salary or benefits, because those things are off the table until there's an offer. So we don't want to have any conversation about that during an interview. So after the interview, your job is not finished. You're going to make sure that you follow up with the employer, even multiple panelists. If there were more than one interviewing you, if possible, it's good for them to get a note. Now this can be a handwritten note like is featured here. This can be a formal business style letter, as you see here, and it can be delivered via the post office or email. Any or all of that is acceptable, although I think at this point in time, electronic mail would be preferred. So now I want to talk about Big Interview. You've probably heard of it by now. Our Mercer Center for Career and Professional Development is very excited a few years ago to be able to invest in the Big Interview tool for our Mercerians. It's completely free and it's provided to all students. And it is an interview preparation tool. I have an image on the screen that kind of gives you an idea about the way that it's going to help candidates practice by offering a mock interview via your webcam. And most computers and devices now are coming with a built-in webcam, so that's going to be pretty much automatic for most, but even if you need to invest in a webcam, they're pretty inexpensive in general. And I think you're going to need one in today's virtual environment right now. But I want to spend just a little bit talking about the tools inside of Big Interview. I have on the screen just a little snippet of the written curriculum that sits inside of Big Interview. They have 9 modules. And again, this is a tool that I want you to use. Honestly, if you were to do these modules, and specifically modules 1, 3, and then 5 through 9 are specific to helping you ace the job interview. If you would spend time going through those, you will honestly have gone through an interview prep course, if you will. It's very similarly laid out to something you might see like modules in your Canvas class at Mercer or something like that. And I'm hoping to get to show you this in just a minute. There is a really cool tool inside of Big Interview called the Answer Builder. And earlier I mentioned the STAR method, which is our pro tip that we always coach our students and alumni with interview preparation, and that situation, task, your approach, or sometimes it's action and your results, helping candidates think through their stories and how to shape those stories in a meaningful way is important. I used the Answer Builder as a part of my preparation for today's webinar, and it is outstanding. It even allows you to get to a certain point in the wizard to export your results, and it just prints out nicely in a Word doc. So let's take just a minute and go over into Big Interview. Give me just a second to transition. So here you see, this is my Big Interview landing page. Once you create your Big Interview account, now this is accessible in your Handshake account. If you'll go in Handshake and you'll click Career Center, and then you'll click Resources and scroll down to the Big Interview listing, the links are right there along with the instructions, even a code that's specific for alumni. But this is what the landing page looks like. And to give you an idea of the written curriculum. Now, again, there's so much. They have this learn portion of Big Interview and also a practice portion. The practice portion is going to be where the webcam is being used and actors and actresses are going to ask questions. And there are literally hundreds of questions. They're industry specific. You'll be really, really amazed to see how robust this tool is. But right this minute, I want to talk about this Learn curriculum that they have here in this written curriculum box. We're going to click that. And here's where the modules that I mentioned live. And so you'll see interview 1 is, module 1, excuse me, is the interview basics. And again, the curriculum that they have here is outstanding. I really could not have done a better job in terms of preparing slides for today's webinar. This is so robust. They're asking you to think about what the employer wants, what types of interviewers you might encounter. Again, this is a lot of content. We can't go through it here. There's some content here about resumes, which you could look at certainly later. And then module 3 will pick back up with landing the interview, your guide to company research. We talked about that earlier, the importance of research. Again, just look at the content that's here. Like I said, if you go through all of this, it's done a little bit like an app where you can check off. You notice that it's keeping track of my progress with what has been accomplished in here. this is really, really a robust tool and more like a course. Even see some information here about LinkedIn profile, and we're going to have some programming tomorrow from CCPD on LinkedIn 101. I hope you'll join us for that, and just remember this curriculum is here. And looking down at interview preparation, I love these topics, and you know, you can go through all of these. Now, developing your interview story, again, pulling your attention here, this is so, so important. Here's where Big Interview will talk to you about the STAR approach and will guide you right through it and even give examples. Big Interview offers advice about the attire that candidates should wear as well. So I hope that this will be very helpful. Let's skip down to Module 9 now. All right, behavior interviews. Here will be a great section for you to review. As I said earlier, that this will be important for you to review to get ready as well. So this is in Big Interview. And if I come back to the main page, all right. You can see there's a lot of other curriculum here. And in the practice category, you'll click practice interviews and you can see the answer builder that I was referring to earlier is right here. So I hope Big Interview will be a tool that you will use. Again, the answer builder I think is phenomenal. It'll help you work through the STAR method. And it's built in wizard screens that helps you, again, you'll build your answers and hit continue, and then at some point you'll be able to export. So let me transition back to my slideshow. And I think we may be getting near the end. Pardon me. So before we leave the Big Interview topic, I wanted to just mention that they also have a YouTube channel that I strongly recommend that you subscribe to. There are numerous videos there, including the infamous how to answer the tell me about yourself question, which I think will be greatly helpful. So a big message that we want to share with all Mercerians is that the Center for Career and Professional Development has lots of interview support to our bears, including mock interviews. We can absolutely take on the role of the employer, have done this many times over the years, and really ask you to answer questions and coach you right through that if that's what you like. Individual consultation appointments would be needed to do that. In your handshake messaging, you could just indicate that you're looking for a mock interview time with us. And we're, you know, career coaches and counselors and consultants, and this is what we do, so we wouldn't worry at all if you stumble with us. We are here to help Mercerians, and that's what we want to do. We can also provide assistance with Big Interview, and we can help you with critiquing your thank you letters are going to go out to employers. And we can certainly be your best cheerleader, providing enthusiasm and encouragement to you because we want you to be the bear. Now, coming up this week, we have Master the Virtual Job Interview on Thursday at 4 p.m. This is going to be where we take a deep dive into the virtual aspect of job interviewing. Which I think it's here to stay. And so we might as well talk about that and get you really ready to master that. I hope you'll join us. And I think that's all of my presentation, Cindy. If you want to take that back and we can talk about our virtual appointments and finish our webinar today.
Sounds great, Kim. Thanks. You did, as usual, a fantastic job with your presentation. Thank you so, so much. I'm sure all of our participants here got some valuable knowledge out of that. I just typed in our chat box, so please, if you do have a question, go ahead and type it in there for Kim to answer. I have one to get us started, so everyone's thinking about a question to ask. Kim, going back to the middle part of your presentation, when you were discussing the different aspects of what happens when you go into the interview. So at the end of the interview, we, of course, suggest students or alumni should have a question or two ready to say back to the person that has been interviewing them. Can you give us some examples of these types of questions?
Sure.
That would be appropriate?
I think I can, but again, if you Google this, there's going to be loads of advice. One of the favorites that I have is, tell me about the expectations of the job in the first 6 months. That gives you an idea of what to expect right off the bat. And, tell me about your culture, your company culture, if the word company is appropriate. Things like that. Tell me about what you are proud of with the accomplishments of your company or organization in the past year. It lets them have an opportunity to brag, and you're going to begin to see a lot about how enthusiastic or not they are. Those are 3 examples.
Excellent. I'm looking at this question that just came in. Let me read it real quick. So this individual is looking for customized guidance. So they've been in the job market for about 20 years and recently laid off. So is there any unique advice for those who find themselves suddenly back in the job market?
I think that my would be to make an individualized appointment. We are trained to sit down with you and to listen. I would say number 1, listen, and to think about what the hurdles have been in the job search and to provide a customized plan for you. And I think that would be most helpful.
And Kim, can you just go through how someone should make an appointment with us?
Absolutely, great point. So the handshake tool, which is provided to all Mercer students who are enrolled, but also we provide that tool to alumni free of charge, but they do have to request the account. But it's a free tool. And so inside of Handshake, that's our platform with how we communicate. There is an appointments tool inside that allows you to see our calendar and our availability, each one of us on the team, and to schedule your appointment really at your own convenience.
Excellent. I see 2 other questions that have come in as well. So should someone follow up with a thank you after an interview and advice for how to do so?
Absolutely. So the thank you is important. I think that's what's going to set you apart from other candidates. Of course, lots of people have that advice, but I think, and I should have talked about this on that slide, you're not going to give generic messaging. When I advise Mercerians to give their thank you, whether it's an email or a letter, I want them, of course, to thank the interviewer, but mostly what I'd like for them to do is to reiterate their interest and be enthusiastic, but also align an additional selling point to something they learned in the interview. So this message is the prime opportunity to make the sale, if you will, or to give that closing selling point. And hopefully it's based on a new point that you discovered during the interview. So use the thank you as another opportunity to reiterate your interest and provide an aligned selling point.
And following up with that, this question also aligns with that. Is a thank you card more appropriate or an email?
Well, they were both on the slide, so I'm fine with either. But when we say a thank you card, excuse me, I don't mean, like a Hallmark greeting card. I mean plain professional stationery that doesn't have any pictures or graphics other than just the words thank you. For example, I've also seen blank stationery. You just want to be very conservative with your choice of cards. I know some people have mistaken that to mean like a greeting card, and that is not what we mean. And hopefully the image shared earlier would share that. If you go back and review the webinar later, you can see an image.
Perfect. And so if you have multiple people that are interviewing you, is it appropriate to ask those interviewers for their business card, or should you ask from maybe the administrative assistant, or how do you go about requesting their information?
My advice would be to see what flows well. I think either could be acceptable. If you'll, I think it's number 1 to answer the question. It's okay to ask for a business card from the panelist. I think that's acceptable, and it lets people know that you care about who you spoke with today. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But in the case that maybe you forgot to do that, or it wasn't provided, or someone forgot their business cards that's on the panel, that again is why you have your Padfolio in front of you, and it's perfectly acceptable to write those names down.
Great. So this is a great question as well. So in advance of your interview, is it possible, or do you think it's appropriate to ask the person who set up that interview for a list of the interviewers in advance so you can review their information on LinkedIn and the company website?
I think that if you can do that research before the interview, that would be great to find out who is the decision maker or who the position reports to on LinkedIn. That's a great point. Any work that you can do ahead of time, I do think it's acceptable to ask the person who's invited you to the interview if they could shed light on the format or who would be included. And then of course you may or may not get all the answers, but you're going to have to do your homework, and hopefully you're using LinkedIn because it can be a great tool to help you discover those names.
Great. Well, I think that is the last question I see in our chat box. We'll give it a couple more seconds in case someone has something else. But again, Kim, thank you. Oh, here. How about, oh, here's a good one. Any advice for introverts?
Introverts.
So yeah, for an introvert, yeah.
Yeah, an interview advice for introverts. I'm going to say the self-talk and the confidence and the preparation ahead of time is going to be important. And I think the writing out of the preparation, the thoughts of how you'll align your selling points ahead of time, and then practice, 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 because you know, it may or may not be so comfortable when you go live, but hopefully the practice and the preparation you will have put in advance would be really helpful to have you come together with a natural flowing confidence.
Perfect. Well, I think that was our last question. So I do want to plug one more time our virtual interview webinar that's going to be happening on Thursday. So please join us again at 4 o'clock. You can find this information in Handshake as a link to register, or on our website, or on any of our social media channels. So be sure to join us again for that, for just virtual interviewing, which will be very different than the in-person interview. And again, I want to thank my great colleague, Kim, for putting this together. Thank you, Kim.
That's my pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. I appreciate it, and I hope it was helpful.
It very much was. And with that, we'll go ahead and conclude for today. Thank you, everyone.